Hello, everybody. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Sarah Shalin. I am the chair of the Department of Dermatology at UAMS here in Little Rock. And tonight I'm thrilled to be moderating this book event co-hosted by the Central Arkansas Library System and the Department of Medical Humanities and Bioethics at UAMS with the Department of Dermatology at UAMS. I'd also like to give a quick shout out to all the behind the scenes help that we're having from the CAL system tonight to make sure this event runs smoothly. Tonight we have a real treat. Sarah Everts is joining us to discuss her newly released book, The Joy of Sweat, which I think may be reversed as you see it up here, but it is an excellent and fun read. The New York Times is calling it entertaining and illuminating. Sarah Everts is a longtime journalist with a master's degree in chemistry. She's written for a variety of publications, including Scientific American, New Scientist, Smithsonian, Chemical and Engineering News, and The Economist. She spent most of her career based in Toronto, Washington, D.C., and Berlin, Germany, but she now lives in Ottawa, Canada. She's currently a journalism professor at Carleton University and serves as the chair of digital science journalism. In addition to writing about the science of sweat, Sarah has won numerous awards and accolades for her reporting on the dark history of chemical weapons and also using science to authenticate art. In her free time, she loves to work up a sweat in her garden, on her spin bike, and in the sauna. So Sarah, I'm so glad you're joining us this evening. Thank you so much for being here.
It's really a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So welcome to Little Rock, virtually though it may be. But let's just kind of dive right in. As we, the way I anticipate this will go is that you and I will kind of have a conversation. I've got some questions lined up for you about your book, about your experiences writing the book. And for those of you that are participating in the webinar tonight, I do hope that this becomes interactive and that you are able to have some of your questions answered as well. So if questions arise as you're listening to us talk, or if you have some other question that's related to sweat, I encourage you to put it into the Q&A box here in the webinar, and we'll keep an eye on those. And towards kind of the second half of the evening, I'll make sure that we start looking at all those questions and get some of them answered as well. So please use the question and answer box, preferably over the chat. The chat can be for other discussion type things. All right, well, I'm going to dive right in, Sarah. So this book really tackles a whole bunch of things: medical science, psychology, forensics, and legal issues related to sweat. How did you even think of it? What made you think that the topic of sweat deserves its own book?
Well, I think like a lot of us, I was always a little mortified by my own sweat, worried a little bit that I might sweat too much, in any workout that I do, I'm already reaching for my towel when it's, just the warm up. And so, I'm also a science journalist and, former scientist. And so I knew that evolutionary biologists count sweating as one of the unique things that makes humans human, along with big brains and near nakedness. So I thought, okay, I need to dig into the science of sweat to find a little bit more serenity rather than shame in all the sweating that I certainly do. And then there was kind of two things that also happened. I spent a decade in Germany reporting, and when I moved there, I wanted to integrate with the locals, meet people, and everybody there, at least in Berlin, goes to the sauna. And I was like, why do people sweat for fun? But, when in Rome, and, I discovered the catharsis of it all, while also reading on the walls of spas, all sorts of spurious claims about, the health benefits of sauna, of which there are some. So I wanted to dig into that. And then last but not least, as a journalist, you get a million press releases in your inbox every day. And I'll be honest, many you don't actually read, but one day I got this press release and it said something like, artificial perspiration, a new product for blah, blah. And I'm like, it was like the record ending moment where I thought, why I certainly produce a surplus. Why would there be bottles of synthetic sweat made by chemists, circulating the globe? So anyway, that ends up being a chapter. So sort of all these things kind of came together.
Well, you've given me some more questions to ask already, just based on that. But so let's start on that evolutionary question that you asked. So as a physician myself, I may know some of the answers here, but why do we sweat? Why do humans sweat? Why is this a relatively unique function? And what does it function to do?
Right. So the reason we sweat is to cool ourselves down, right? And it's part and parcel with being naked. We have this huge surface area off of which we can evaporate sweat that is produced by the 2 to 5 million sweat glands that we have evolved uniquely for this purpose. And if you think back into humans' evolutionary history, many of the predators that we sought to hunt sprint way faster than us, right? But ultimately they need to stop to cool down, whereas we, because of our sweat glands, could exercise and cool down simultaneously. And that's the evolutionary superpower trick. And so we could, chase our prey on the savannah, catch up with it, forcing it to sprint again and again and again until it, expired from heat stroke, which is a terrible way to die. But it's, clearly there are other animals that do rely a little bit on sweat. So horses and cows are, probably the two best known. But in terms of our efficiency and just the volumes of sweat that we produce, we are way better than any other animal. And, if you just think of our favorite pet, or some of our favorite pets, the dog, right? It is furry. Therefore, even if it had sweat glands on its body, it's not a great way to evaporate heat when you got a lot of hair. And so it pants. Dogs pant because the only naked real estate that they have is that tongue, whereas we've got our whole bodies. So yeah, that's why it's this like very efficient form of cooling, because the evaporation literally whisks our body heat out into the atmosphere. And it's why it's so unique to humans, because we are the naked ape.
And I guess that could mean that if we got super overheated and we didn't feel like we were sweating enough, we could open our mouth and pant a little bit as their mechanism.
Or, what some animals do is lick their bodies. And this I would not suggest, but, seals will pee on their fins to dispatch liquid to the surface of their body to evaporate away. This is like this efficient way of cooling. Honeybees vomit and vultures poop on their legs. Same goal. When you know what it could have been, what evolution could have given us, the fact that we just release a little salty water
doesn't seem so bad.
No, not at all.
And I guess that too adds to why when you're running a marathon and you go past the side, or a 5K, because I'm not a marathon runner, you grab the water and you just douse it on yourself, and that feels so blissful at that time. It's that evaporative cooling immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
So can you tell us a little bit about when sweat glands go wrong? So what are some of the medical conditions in which that can affect the way people sweat?
Right. So kind of the extremes, actually. So because it's the difference between life and death, one of the medical conditions is not having sweat glands at all. And this is common in with a genetic mutation. It's not very common in the general population, but if you have this mutation, it's called X-linked hypohidrotic ectodermal dysplasia, or XLHED. If you have it, you don't have any sweat glands. And so people with this condition have to walk around with like a spritz bottle to dispatch water onto their skin. It's really hard for them to live in warm climates at all. At the other extreme is, a condition called hyperhidrosis, where people sweat so much that it can really interfere with day-to-day life. So for example, you have so much sweat on your hands, it's hard to hold a cell phone or a pencil or glassware or, anything that you would need to hold for your job. It just slips out. And this can result in, extreme stigmatization because our society has a lot of taboos that are really foolish about sweat. And then there's another kind of hyperhidrosis that's called secondary hyperhidrosis. And this is kind of something that's not related to your genetics, but more related to, a side effect of a drug that you take, for example, or there's a really interesting medical case of a person who developed seizures later in life. And, whenever he had a seizure, he would just pour sweat, so much so that, it would drip. There would be puddles on his desk, and then it would stop. And this would happen, just a month at a time. So there's some kind of unique reasons behind why some people sweat a lot or a little.
So Sarah, I've got to tell you, when I picked up the book and when my contact at the library asked me if I'd be willing to read it and then discuss and have this discussion with you, I said to myself, I hope the book mentions chromhidrosis. If it doesn't mention chromhidrosis, I don't know if I'm going to put stock in this book or not. And lo and behold, I opened the very first page in the introduction to this book, and there it is, chromhidrosis. Tell our participants about what chromhidrosis is, because it's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. So I'll tell you about this woman who ends up having it. It is colored sweat. So as much as sweat can be stigmatized, imagine if your sweat was not translucent, but red. And this was the case of this nurse who was living in South Africa. And, her day-to-day job requires her to wear a white uniform, and her sweat was turning red. So, where she had wet patches or, around her collar, it was starting to be stained. And she just felt, first of all, freaked out about, having red sweat. And then she was also worried about it professionally. So she goes to this dermatologist who is deeply fascinated and does everything possible to try and figure out what the heck is going on, and cannot figure it out until this follow-up appointment where kind of serendipity steps in. So she shows up, and they notice on her fingertips that her fingers are kind of reddish brown, kind of how it looks if you know anybody who rolls their own cigarettes, except they knew that she was not a smoker. So they're like, why are your fingers, reddish brown? And she was like, oh yeah, I just had my favorite snack. And it turns out her favorite snack was this spicy tomato corn chip. And it was not just her favorite snack. She was having up to 45 bags a week. They called it a fetish. And I don't think that was, overstating it. And so, yeah, effectively what was happening was that the dyes in that corn chip were circulating around in her blood, kind of like when you have a hard night of hummus or a hard night of drinking, the smell of garlic or alcohol can emerge out, except instead of being a smell, it was a color. But I would love to say that, even though this was kind of an alarming thing to happen to her, this is not a reason to think that sweating was the detox method her body was trying to use to get rid of this predilection. Is that the right word for these corn chips? Because so effectively where sweat is sourced is from the watery parts of blood, right? It's like blood minus the big things like platelets and red blood cells and stuff like that. It percolates out to make the inner part of your body moist. That's called interstitial fluid. And then, when your sweat glands get the cool down directive, they got to source something. And so they source this liquid. And so, one of the biggest myths about sweating is this idea that it's a detox method. If you detoxed by sweating, you would literally have to get rid of all the liquid in your blood in order to get the nasty stuff that's flowing around out. If you did that, you would dehydrate and die. Instead, your kidney exists to filter that out and dispatch it out in pee. But the fact that that color was coming out, it was just incidental, right? Taking a ride along with the salt and the hormones, the other good stuff, the glucose that her body needs, and it hadn't yet been filtered out of her blood by the kidney, probably because the kidney was like, what the heck, 45 bags, lady, I can deal with 42.
Right, right. Yeah, as a medical professional myself, I thank you for making that comment about detox. I think there are a lot of kind of myths about the idea that you can sweat out these dangerous elements or negative things that you take in, and that's, yeah, I agree. Thank you for clarifying that for everyone that's watching. Kidneys are really where it's at when it comes to getting stuff out of the body. And I should also say that Chromhidrosis, as super fascinating as it is, it's very weird. I mean, I'm sorry, it is very weird, but it's very unusual. And so someone has put a comment in our question and answer box and said, is it something I need to worry about? And I really don't think that it would be something that you would need to worry about. And I think most case reports of Chromhidrosis are something similar along the lines of the story of that you just told, that there's some ingestion that leads to the colored sweat, but certainly something that would make us all just kind of pause a little bit, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, there was some guy who got his sweat red from drinking too much cranberry juice, like really too much, and then another one who was eating a lot of laxatives. The colored coating of the laxative pill ended up coming out in his sweat. So yeah, you're right. It is really rare, but it usually reflects, consuming maybe a little too much of something.
So one of the things I really like about the book is how it intersperses science with a lot of anecdotes. And there are a lot of favorite anecdotes in this book, actually, but I was fascinated by the story about your visit to the Osmothèque in Versailles, in France. And for the participants here, this was what sounds to be like a perfume museum. And so as much of this book talked about sweat, there was an equal proportion, I thought, that talked about the olfactory and the perception of smell, and how sweat is very much tied into smell and odor. And so this perfume museum that you went to was fascinating, and these researchers there and scientists there are trying to recreate historical smells. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, for most of human history, we've dealt with our body odor either by washing, maybe with soap, or by putting on a lot of perfume, either to complement our BO or to mask it. And there was this perfumier named Jean Carliot, who was responsible for all these blockbuster perfumes in the 70s and the 80s, and he made Lacoste's perfume line, Sublime 1000, all these blockbuster perfumes. And when he came close to retirement, he started thinking about the history of perfume, and was curious about some of the recipes that you could find in 1,000-year-old documents. And in particular, the first one that inspired him was one that was back from Pliny the Elder, 2,000 years ago, that was made for Parthian royalty, the area around Iran. And so he thought, okay, I'm going to try and recreate this ancient perfume to find out, are the scents that we enjoy nowadays on our bodies the same as in history? And so yeah, so he like dug he. It was actually really challenging because, you know, these days, you know, perfumes are not made from, you know, macerated ben nuts from, you know, the Horn of Africa. So he had to like, you know, get botanists in and, you know, track down some really rare ingredients. And I smelt it, and it was just this like delicious combination of incense. It felt like Catholic incense, but you know, it speaks to the fact that, you know, Christianity owes some of its you know, ceremonies to earlier practice, and it also smelled like apple crisp. So it was like as if I went into like a secret priest's closet and was like given apple crisp to eat. But yeah, but he's recreated all sorts of scents, like one worn by a Hungarian queen in the 14th century that was sold as an elixir of youth because she had lived to the ripe old age of 75 and had, you know, married a younger man, and it smelt of like rosemary and thyme. And so just like lovely, you know, it was such an incredible odorous experience. And, you know, slightly different from the one where I sniffed through another perfumier's collection of body odor perfume that she had made using the same sorts of ingredients that you'd make to produce Chanel No. 5, but instead she was recreating the unique body odor prints of men with anxiety disorders. So yeah, I spent a lot of time sniffing stuff while writing this book.
So that kind of launches into one of the questions I had, I think, with people ask this all the time: can you smell fear? Kind of asked this question in the book, and I think you alluded to some of the research you had done as you were asking this question.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, our body odor, people often conflate two kinds of sweat glands, right? So the one that gives us this cooling ability, this superpower, are eccrine glands. But there's this other kind of gland that appears at puberty in armpits or anywhere where you grow hair at puberty, and its sweat is actually more waxy, and that's what's responsible for turning armpits into stink zones during the teenage years. And, you know, bacteria eat that sweat and turn it into odor, right? So we all have a body odor print that's like a mix of, you know, those smells that become dominant from, you know, adolescence onwards, plus, you know, any residual smells from our other sweat. But law enforcement had long noticed that when people show up to, you know, have an interrogation, that they come in smelling of themselves, right? You smell like you, I smell like me. A dog can track you based on your t-shirts and can track me based on mine. So people would come in smelling of themselves, but they would all leave smelling the same, of anxiety. And, you know, researchers were like, what? And so they followed up with some interesting studies where they gave people t-shirts to wear and put them in front of two videos. One was like a nature documentary, and the other just a very scary film. So they were either just sweating as they normally would, or sweating out of fear. And when they handed those t-shirts to a panel of sniffers who were complete strangers, didn't know these individuals, they could pick out from, you know, those t-shirts who had been, you know, sweating out of fear. So, you know, there's this really great interest, particularly from the military, in figuring out what that top note is. So chemists are trying to figure out what is that molecule out of the hundreds that come out of our armpits and bodies that, you know, gives this clue. Because of course, you know, they're interested in it because in a combat situation, you can imagine a group of people in a tank, and, you know, one person starts to get fearful, you know, they produce this molecule, and what if that fear spreads? What if this compromises the mission? And so if you can figure out what that molecule is, perhaps you can trap it like you would trap a poison gas, or, you know, how we're trying to capture CO2. So you could trap it, sequester it, get it away. So yeah, really interesting research. Chemists haven't managed to nab that molecule yet, but they're on their way.
That's so fascinating. I bet the audience participants did not anticipate that we would go down into like forensics. And I'm telling you, there's so many facets of this book that you've tackled. I am going to switch gears and talk about another thing that I just can't stop thinking about. I don't know if it'll ever take hold here in North America, but please tell us about sweat dating. And what is sweat dating? And if you're willing to share some of your own experience participating in sweat dating.
Yeah. So, dating is such a dark place these days. But, maybe this is the antidote. I don't know. So the premise is this. You are, at some point in your relationship with anybody, whether it's a one night stand or a lifelong partnership, you're going to smell the body odor of your partner, and it will be a make or break moment. So instead of using, optics or shared hobbies as your triage strategy, why not use body odor as the, it's going to be a make or break. Let's just check that out first. So that's the philosophy of it. In practice, these events happen actually all over the world. There was one I know for sure was in New York City. I went to one in Russia, in Moscow. And what happens is you show up, and the first thing that you do, you're given a wet wipe. And you're told to wipe off any deodorants or perfumes or anything you put on. And then you're taken through some high intensity exercise, burpees, jumping jacks, squats, so that you work up a sweat. Once that's done, you're then given a cotton pad where you're informed you need to dab all your parts that might have gotten smelly in the process. You do that, and then you put that cotton pad in a glass jar. And that glass jar is numbered, and only you know the number and the organizers know the number. And the glass jars are put on this table, and you effectively sniff through them all. And if I were to sniff your glass jar and thought, that's a lovely scent, I could dig that. And if you were to sniff mine, we would be a match. And, these glass jars are not segregated in any way by gender identity or orientation or anything. It's like a free-for-all sniff fest. Anyway, some of the odors were not what I would ever want to sniff again. Some were kind of pleasant in that way that when you go to your grandmother's house, if you had a good relationship with her, or you land in your home airport and you're like, oh, I'm home, there's these smells. So there are some smells that were just warm and nostalgic and happy, even though they're body odor. And then there's some that you're like, hello. Hello. So yeah, it was really interesting. Oh, and the best part is if you do make a match, you're given this bracelet, so you can go to this VIP vodka lounge where you can drink, there's all you can drink vodka cocktails, so that you can figure out if the optics and the shared hobbies also work out. Anyway, very surreal, kind of fun, kind of gross. Yeah, I'd do it again.
So I'm thankful that I'm already partnered up, and I'm not out there in the dating scene, because I'm not sure I could do it.
Smell dating as your, yeah. I did it more out of adventure. I'm not sure.
It was research too, right? I mean, you were researching. I think what you said about how some smells were not completely unpleasant, whereas others definitely gave you a let me turn away vibe. Yeah. And I find it interesting. Did you go on the smell dating with with a group of people? I mean, did different people find different odors similarly unappealing and similarly appealing? You know what I mean? I think that we all have different perceptions. We all carry olfactory smell memories that are different from, our friends and family. And so I imagine that the whole basis of this is that the perception of these odors are going to be unique based on who you are, and you're going to match with different people potentially.
Yeah, I mean, we all also live in our own olfactory world, right? So, the number of genes that we have that are responsible for sniffing, our perception of what, an apple smells like, like the genes that I could be expressing, that I could be using are different than the ones you are. So, even if we went up and smelled the same person, my perception of their body odor could be different. And what was so interesting about, when they're like calling out the matches and people are partnering up and you're like watching it, and, all sorts of weird random groups are like, and you're like, you really think to yourself, there is someone for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. So did you match with anybody?
I did. So I matched with so there was one number 15 where like in my reporter's notebook, I like devoted an entire page of the notebook to 15. Like I don't think I've ever written a number so large in my life. And like there are 3 exclamation marks. Anyway, so I picked number 15. I did not match with number 15. But I did match with number 22, who is this like, I remember her body odor. She had the top note. So humans, like our BO, our odor print is like made up of like hundreds of different molecules, but there's 2 top notes that really dominate. One is kind of smells like wet goat. And the other one is like a raw onion meets passion fruit overripe. And these 2 top notes are the ways that you can go into an elevator and know that it was a stinky human in there and not a stinky horse. And then like everything else is kind of like what gives you your symphony and my odorous symphony. Anyway, so hers like it was smelled like, kind of oniony, passion fruit, but there was this like, it also smelled like grass, and like it felt like a warm summer's day in a meadow. And she was lovely. It was really great to meet her. We had some drinks and chatted away, had a nice night, and she was married. We were both straight, but yeah, it's just lovely. It's nice to try it out.
Yeah. What a fascinating story. I that was one of the most interesting sweat related practices that I've heard of. And I mean, I can see how it makes sense. Again, I'm not sure that I would be adventurous enough to give it a go myself. All right, let me see. What other questions do I have for you? Oh, so another thing, and you alluded to this a little bit about your time spent in Europe and Berlin, and how you took to the sauna to kind of join in with what the sort of local customs were. I don't know how many of our audience members are regular sauna goers, but certainly it's not the same thing here in North America that it is in Europe. So tell me about saunas and what's the theory behind regular sauna use in Europe and some of the different countries there.
Yeah, sure. So I would say that like if there's anyone here from Minnesota, they would beg to differ. I was on NPR in Minnesota, and oh my gosh, I got a lot of questions. They even like were cranky about how I was saying sauna. So it's sauna. It's a Finnish word, and I do know that, but here in North America, we say sauna. But yeah, so sauna comes from Finland, right? But quite honestly, in most cultures around the world, at some point in their history, if not now, there has been, some sweat ceremony. So if you think even in North America, Native Americans still use sweat lodges. There's hammams in the Middle East. There's jjimjilbangs in Korea, and the sauna is what the Finns have exported across Western Europe and also elsewhere in the world. And the favorite thing that I love to do is something called the Aufguss, where you go in and there is an Aufguss master, and Aufguss means infusion, and the Aufguss master shows up in this tiny little towel, and they've got a bucket of water which has been infused with a scent of some kind, clementine or eucalyptus or lemongrass. And they pour that water on the hot rocks. And so you get this pulse of steam. And that's pretty common, a pulse of steam, to kind of make a steam room. But what's amazing is that the addition of this essential oil makes that steam just like this glorious, odorous, joyous thing. And then the Aufguss master takes off the towel and starts whipping it around, like helicopter style initially, and then moves the air around the sauna, playing with the physics, because even in a sauna, hot air rises. So they kind of whip these hot gusts of scented aroma steam at you. And it's kind of like the opposite of a wind chill factor, where, you feel colder when, it's wind chill. And I tell you, with that towel, it just like pushes you to the extreme. And there's this catharsis, which is all just biochemistry, right? So your heart has to beat faster to pump blood around your body so that you can cool off, right? Because of course, this evaporation that's happening is happening so that like the blood rushing by can actually be cooled so that it can go into your interior and, bring the cooler blood there to cool down your core. So anyway, so, when you feel these hot gusts, everything is like just so intense. You're sweating so much. Your heart is beating so fast because it's trying to get all that blood pumping, that it's actually a mild workout for your heart. And spas make all sorts of like very spurious health claims. But one of the few that is based in like long-term epidemiological studies is one that has looked at the health of hearts of men in Finland who regularly go to the sauna. And, there's controls, there's thousands of people in the study. They've been doing it for decades. And yeah, they had lower incidence of all the kind of cardiovascular diseases that you could imagine. Now, the part of that statement is that was for men who went to the sauna like 4 times a week. And in fact, their like base rate, they were comparing it to men who only went to a sauna once a week, because in Finland, there are more saunas than people. So, you really do have to go to the sauna a lot to get, beneficial heart stuff, heart health. But, it is, people have looked at the enzymes and other biochemistry that's happening when you're sweating profusely, and found that you do produce, higher levels of endorphins, which are sometimes thought to be involved in runner's high. You're also producing plaque clearing enzymes. So it is exercise for your heart, but like without the calorie burning, without the like muscle building. But definitely your heart is working really hard.
And with this, oftentimes with the social interaction too, right? Because I think your book talks about how sauna actually can be a social event just as much as a sort of personal cleansing kind of feel of sweating.
Oh, totally. It was so fascinating to sweat in Finland, particularly because, by the time I went to Finland to sweat at one of their like smoke saunas, which is like this delicious kind of sweating ceremonies experience, Finns have this stereotype of being very like, staid, not like serious, not very jovial. And, many stereotypes are, based in something, but you go into a sauna with Finns and you're like, this is not the stereotype, because people are like chatting, striking up conversations with strangers. And yeah, it's this like, it's rooted in their social life in a way that is really delightful to experience.
That's fantastic. Well, we've touched on some of the personal stories that you have in this book. Sweat dating, sauna performances. You had your armpits professionally sniffed. You had your sweat glands measured. What do you have one favorite experience that's described in the book?
Yeah, I think having my armpits sniffed by a professional nose was kind of great, and kind of like, I remember, okay, so let me explain to you why these people do this. So companies who produce deodorants and antiperspirants love to make claims like, this stops odor for 24 hours, for example. Well, they need to have somebody do that test. And who do they hire but a professional nose? And also, we have two armpits. It's perfect for science. You have the control armpit that gets no product and the actual armpit that does. And so you like, and like, so she, exists. And I remember thinking, I can't believe this human exists. I was so excited. So I like set up this interview. I'm like, could you please smell my armpits? And I get there and I'm like, oh my God, there's another human who's now going to smell my armpits on purpose. And she's a professional nose. I think I would like to die now. So like it was but she was lovely. This is what's so interesting about people who are professional noses is they're not judgmental about odor. So like one day she's sniffing armpits, the next day she's sniffing coffee, a new set of coffees from a food company. And she said to me, you sniff anything all day long and you hate that smell at the end of the day, right? Like it's not, they're very into kind of being agnostic about scent. They're like, what are the component parts? What's the top note? How intense is it? As opposed to, how, plebes like you and I, well, like myself, I won't speak for you, are just like, oh, that's great. Or, oh, yeah, there's so much more sophistication. So yeah, that was definitely both surreal, exciting, and terrifying.
Great story, though. All right, you mentioned this a little bit in I think the first thing that you said too when I introduced you, but that this is what piqued your interest and one of the reasons you actually wrote the book, because you saw that press release about artificial sweat. Tell us, so there is an industry for fake sweat. What is it? Why does it exist?
So not only does it exist, not only is there like a huge surplus of sweat in this world, right? Like I do one spin session and I could collect, enough to sell. And I actually bought a teaspoon, 5 milliliters of synthetic sweat from this company for 141 Canadian dollars. So I don't know, maybe 120 US dollars. So it's pricey, right? So, this is not, and it's not, randos doing kind of dodgy things. It's actually really important for a whole bunch of industries. So this dress that I'm wearing, it's black and white. If I were to be really stressed out and I sweat into it, the company who makes the textile wants to make sure that that black dye doesn't, dissolve in my sweat and stain my body black or pink or whatever color. So textile industry, cell phone industry is like really interested in making sure the electronics are still working when your fingers get really sweaty, right? Guitar string manufacturers want to make sure that their guitar strings don't dissolve when you do a crazy solo. The forensics industry is really interested in it because when you say lift a print from a crime scene, they want to do analyses of, they want to dye that pink, usually with an anhydrine. And by the way, a fingerprint is just a sweat print. It's been inked in your sweat. So when they do that experiment, they're dyeing it pink based on dyeing proteins that have come out in your sweat and been left in that fingerprint. And if no color emerges, right, that could be because they didn't actually lift a fingerprint. Maybe, there wasn't really one at the crime scene, or it could mean that maybe something was wrong with the solvents, or maybe the scientist did something wrong. So they always need a control right next to them so that, they know, okay, the chemistry has worked. So if they don't see a print, it's probably just because, there's not one. So you need, fake sweat to because there's just, so, when you're making those controls, you can't always leave a fingerprint if you're not sweating a lot. So yeah, all sorts of industries. So interesting.
Fascinating. Okay, I have a couple more questions, but I am going to encourage everyone. Don't forget, if you have questions while you're watching, please do put some questions for Sarah in the chat. I'm sorry, actually in the Q&A box, preferably not the chat, but we'll go either way. Okay, so you talked a little bit there about how the legal and police community can use artificial sweat. You talked about how fingerprints are just really sort of what we've left behind of our sweat. So then I think that gets into a pretty gritty chapter about the potential forensic uses of sweat and even some deeply sort of philosophical things about regulation of our sweat identity, and could our sweat have some unique molecule that traces us back to ourselves, or can you elaborate on that a little bit for us, Sarah?
Yeah, sure. So because our fingerprints are just inked in sweat, right? And because sweat is sourced from the watery parts of blood, anything that is flowing around your body can come out in your sweat and be left on a fingerprint. And, most of the time when forensic scientists have, been interested in fingerprints, they're interested in how they look, the whorls and the swirls, right? And they want to compare how a fingerprint looks to, say a criminal database. But say there's no hit, right? Then they're like, who the heck was this person at the crime scene? Well, this is like the next generation of fingerprint analysis, where instead of just like looking at how the fingerprint looks, they're actually lifting the minute amounts of chemicals that have been left behind in that print and analyzing them and learning very interesting secrets about the health and the vices of the person who left them behind. So for example, I went to one of the labs where this research is taking place, and I donated a index finger fingerprint, and this chemist could tell that I had drunk a coffee that morning because metabolites of caffeine were coming out in my sweat. Now, okay, caffeine's not like a super taboo stimulant to take, but had I done something else, so maybe I'd put vodka in my coffee or snorted a line of cocaine as a breakfast chaser, if I had done anything else, all of those things also would have come out in my sweat. And in fact, in one proof of principle study, she worked with law enforcement to lift a fingerprint off a windowsill that a stalker had left, and in his fingerprint they could find evidence of alcohol and cocaine use. And not only that, you can find biomarkers of disease, some cancers. She's working on techniques to identify meat eaters from vegans. She's also trying to work on sex, biological sex, age. So, if you think about the fact that this amount of information can be left in the most microscopic amount of sweat that you leave behind, what about the sweat that you're like dripping on yoga mats, that you are leaving on spin bikes? And also, what about the sweat that you're leaving in your office at work, right? Could an employer, do a little check to see if you come to work intoxicated? Could a health insurer do a little check to see if you have a pre-existing condition? There's a lot of kind of privacy invasion that could very easily happen because we are leaving fingerprints everywhere. So there's that dystopian side of things. Then there's kind of like an exciting other side where we all love our Fitbits, right? We love counting ourselves. We are narcissists. Like we want to know our heartbeats at all times. And so you could imagine, and engineers are working on this, like a little sweat patch, like a Band-Aid, but Band-Aid with electronics in it that can analyze the sweat that you have and perhaps send your phone a push signal saying, Sarah, you might have had one too many, best to take a cab home. Or to coaches on a sideline during a team sport event where some of the players are maybe showing signs of stress or exhaustion because these chemicals come out in your sweat. So the coach looks and says, okay, we're going to switch that player out. So there's like these interesting applications for the average person and in all sorts of industries, but then there's also this like, oh my God, we are literally dripping our secrets everywhere. So yeah, I really hope that, privacy activists will get on this before the technology reaches a point where it's kind of disseminated widely. All of this is still in the R&D phase, but things are moving very quickly with electronics, so it's not long.
All really fascinating and thought-provoking usages of sweat and with how much information it has. I wish that this event tonight is co-hosted with the Department of Medical Humanities and Bioethics here at UAMS, and I kind of wish that the chair of that department, Dr. Micah Hester, was on the call with us to actually weigh in on his perception, and if he knows whether anyone is tackling the issues of privacy of sweat medical information that's embedded in there. Okay, well, Sarah, I'm going to turn to a question in the question and answer box. Why do some people sweat more than others?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so like a lot of things, it's a bit of nature, a bit of nurture. So your genetics are going to dictate how many sweat glands you have, your density of sweat glands. It's going to also dictate the rate at which the sweat comes out. And humans have like quite a large rate. So I have a pretty normal number of sweat glands. Most of us have between 2 and 5 million. I have 3, but my sweat rate is up the wazoo. So when I start to sweat, it's like boom. So, that's the genetics side of things. And, there are families, and, I'm outing my whole family, we all sweat pretty quick. But also there's this nurture side, and this is what's really cool and hot in evolutionary biology research. But so we're born with the number of sweat glands that we're going to have, but they're not all active until the toddler years. And so in those first years of life, your body is like learning about the environment in which you live and learning, okay, I need to sweat a lot because she lives really in a hot place, or don't need to really do that. So, there's this mix of nature and nurture that gives you your baseline, right, as an adult, but then you can acclimatize. So, when you go from a really hot climate to a really cold one, or vice versa, your body's learning, and so your body sweat rates also gradually change. And you can do this also more intentionally, which is what all the athletes who are going to Tokyo, starting the Olympics tomorrow, they have been doing hardcore, high-intensity interval training in hot rooms to get their bodies to the point where they can learn how to sweat and be efficient at cooling them down at high maximal performance, because Tokyo, these Olympics are going to be one of the hottest on record. So yeah, a little bit of nature, a little bit of nurture.
Fascinating. That's great. I actually see that Dr. Hester is here and he has weighed in. In case someone's not reading the chat, I will actually read what he says for everyone to hear. He says he's not aware of people working on the ethics of privacy surrounding sweat, but there's a good chance that someone out there probably is, and it's a good point. He also asked a question. You talked about the myth of detoxifying by sweating. Did you come across concerning claims about the healthy aspects of sweat that you think are myths that even medical professionals might be incorrectly perpetuating?
So I think that some medical professionals, probably not so much dermatologists as maybe GPs, like family doctors, don't necessarily take hyperhidrosis as seriously as I wish they would. There's a lot of assumptions I've read in the literature that, oh, you're just too emotional. Oh, deal with your anxiety. But a lot of people who have lived experience with hyperhidrosis says, yeah, sure, I'm anxious about it, but I was sweaty before and now I'm just anxious as a consequence, not as the root cause. So I'd say that in terms of the general public, oh gosh, you see And also in terms of medical research, I wish there was a whole lot more investigation for ways to treat hyperhidrosis. Many of the strategies are invasive or expensive. There's one, I was just actually got an alert. There's one where you microwave your sweat glands. A weightlifter in Mexico just died from a procedure, and who knows, she might have been taking steroids at the same time, which had messed with the, but there's just not a lot of strategies for dealing with hyperhidrosis. I wish the medical world would dig into that in terms of research. And there's tons of spurious claims. Going to the sauna does not cure cancer. Lord, it does not. So yeah, please go to an oncologist.
I'll add, I'll just weigh in my own personal feeling about hyperhidrosis is, as you said, it is a medical condition. And yet, unfortunately, a lot of people believe it to be a cosmetic nuisance, like, oh, it's just something that you have to deal with. And even medical insurance often views the treatment of such as a cosmetic procedure often. And it's really hard from a dermatology standpoint to advocate for patients and say, no, this is truly interfering with your functionality and your daily quality of life. And it really, truly is a medical condition that can be quite debilitating. So I agree with your question, your wishes for more research on that. How does aging affect a person's sweat makeup?
Oh, so I don't think it will actually change so much what comes out, right? Because you're still sourcing. So so you're still sourcing what's coming from your blood. So however your blood chemistry is changing, that's what's going to change with your sweat. And of course, I don't know if the person's alluding to menopause, which is a really interesting area of research, also understudied. But as far as I understand it, and I talked to menopausal researchers, the cause of hot flashes themselves is still being worked out, but the body's response by sweating profusely to deal with it is just the standard, oh God, your core temperature has risen, time to dispatch the cooling strategy. But why the core temperature has risen in menopause, really interesting research, hasn't been done for all sorts of reasons. But yeah.
This is a great question. In the time of a pandemic, is it possible to leave infective germs like cold or the COVID, the flu behind in your sweat?
I would imagine, anything that's traversing your blood could come out, but, viruses and bacteria are pretty large, and I don't think that they could traverse out and through your sweat glands. That being said, the surface of our skin, we are touching all sorts of things and snot. And so, I'm sure there's things that mix with your sweat and maybe drip around, but I don't think it's coming out. But I would say, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong.
That would be my feeling too, that it's not actually excreted in your sweat, but the sweat might pick up any respiratory droplets or aerosolized droplets that you're around and therefore kind of hang on to it. I actually don't totally know the answer for sure though, but I'd be in line with yours. Well, let's see, we've got another question here, and then I know that we're coming close to the end of the hour. I used to be cold nature and wasn't a real sweater. Then I started taking hot yoga for about 4 years, and now I'm not cold natured anymore and I'm a sweating machine. Did spending all that time in the hot room change my body makeup?
I am so glad this question has been asked, because this speaks to this acclimatization, right? So your body, even though you may have been cold, you hadn't been much of a sweater, your body learns that, oh my God, he or she or they has this hobby, they like to go to hot yoga. And when they go and start getting hot, it's not even going to be for a short time, it's going to be for a very long time. So we really need to get the cool down action happening. And this happens to all sorts of athletes. So you talk to athletes who are in training, and their sweat rates go way up. as they train more, because their bodies have learned that, oh God, when she starts working out, it's not like a 7-minute thing on your phone. It's like 7 hours, right? And also people who go to the sauna regularly. So I had always been pretty physically active, but when I started doing sauna for fun, I found my sweat rate went even higher. So like I'd just be walking down the street on a hot day and my body's like, oh God, did she just go into the sauna again? Let's get cracking. So yeah, your body's anticipating your biological needs, your behavioral needs, because you've trained it. So yeah, you trained your body.
That's a bit of the nurture aspect of how we sweat, I guess, that you alluded to earlier. So I guess, we are kind of at the end of the hour. I was hoping I could wrap up and leave everybody with sort of one final deep thought that hopefully you'll get us thinking about with this last question. But you end the book by saying that sweat keeps us honest. How and what did you mean by that exactly?
Yeah. So, I think a lot about, why we have such stigma against sweat and why, there's, this anxiety that we have as a society about it. And there's all sorts of reasons. But one, I think, has to do with the fact that, of all the bodily functions that could mortify us, right? I'm thinking burps, farts, you can hold many of those things back just for a microsecond. So you can like excuse yourself and, deal with that. Whereas when your body gets the cool down directive, there is nothing you can do. And, it just plows out. And so, your sweat glands open because of temperature, but also there's some hormonal responses too. Adrenaline tends to open up. And so, when, you're out for a date with that secret crush, or you just happen to see them, or you're at a job interview and you're like just dripping with sweat, this is like, our bodies revealing our deepest secrets. And, you could think of that as like, damn you body, don't do that. But I do feel like in this era of social media, when we curate so much of what we present outwards, there's kind of this way in which I kind of like that our body keeps us honest. And, there's some aspect where you just can't help it. You are what you are. And your body is just trying to keep you alive. So yeah, I hope, this has been a little bit of a perspiration pep talk, if nothing else.
Well, Sarah, I have just really enjoyed having this conversation with you. Audience, I've enjoyed hearing your comments and questions. There is one question that I just missed until just now, asking about a correlation between sweat and electrolytes. And I will say, if you read the book, if you buy the book, you might actually find the answer to that, because there is a bit in there about the invention of sports drinks and replenishment of electrolytes. But I'll let you read the book for that. Oh, and let's Sarah.
I would say one thing. We've all tasted sweat. Let's just admit that. It's so salty. Could you drink a cup of that? No, you cannot. You would have to add so much sugar that you would get a huge sugar hit. The way we replenish salt is through food. So drink whatever it is that you want, but the main way to get electrolytes is back into your body is through food.
Thanks. Thank you. I really appreciate your basis in science. It's really evident in your responses to all the questions tonight. It's very evident in the book that you wrote. You approach this topic with grounded in the scientific fact, but then interspersed with so much fun and joy. And you can tell that you really enjoyed all the research that you did that went into this book.
I did.
So thank you so much. And thanks to the Central Arkansas Library System and to the departments at UAMS that co-hosted tonight. And Sarah, especially, thank you for being with us today. And I wish you all the best. And we look forward to more books in the future.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for your great questions. So yeah, it was really a pleasure.